Hey everyone, welcome to the Industry Show. I'm your host Nitin Bajaj, and joining me today is Mayank Shekhar. Mayank, welcome on the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Nitin. This is a pleasure.
Pleasure is all ours. So let's get started with who is Mayank?
Oh, wow. That would be a tough one to answer for anyone, right? If you ask them exactly who they were. And most of the times, in any case, self-perception is an exaggeration. We have a very high self-worth usually about who we are, what we do, etc. So I'm going to go with maybe on the professional side because one gets asked this question or has been asked this question over many years. I used to say earlier when I was much younger, I used to say basically what I do for a living is sound really serious and intelligent about very stupid things, you know. That went on for a very long while, and of course, then social media came about, and there you have to list your bio. So I've stuck with because again, it needs to somehow reflect your profession. Like say, even on Instagram, I've probably stuck with podcaster, broadcaster, writer, and chiller. But it has to be necessarily in the reverse order because a lot of what I do actually comes under the ambit of chilling for a lot of people. So, you could be watching a movie, but that's in a sense my job. Not watching a movie, of course, but writing about it thereafter. I could be reading a book and really enjoying it and then writing about that. I could be having a conversation with someone, which is a deeply enjoyable conversation, sometimes even over a drink, and that becomes a television show or that becomes a podcast or it becomes a piece I write thereafter. So I think I'll go with, I try and have fun with what I do, and I've tried to turn that into a profession. So chiller is, if I had to describe myself in one word, it would be chiller, yes.
And that's an enviable life, I should say.
Well, it's still a job, so don't get me wrong. I'm trying to make it sound great, but at the end of the day, work is work. So even while I chill technically for a living, it's still trying to make a living though.
True, but I think in a lot of ways you have your priorities right, right? You're trying to have fun and you're trying to see how to make a living out of that.
That's how it really worked out. I think it's probably from a very young age. I've had a very, very low threshold level for boredom. So anything that I've not enjoyed, I've had to like sort of remove that somehow or the other from my life. And then, you know what? At the end of the day, then I just got left with all those things that I enjoy. I try to make a profession out of it.
I think that's the best way to live life. So I know you do a lot, you've achieved a lot, and you continue to break new thresholds. Tell us, what do you do for a living, other than obviously chilling?
Well, I mean, as I said, Nitin, I mean, to define in terms of what I do from an industry point of view, of course, I work in the media industry. And media industry, as you would know, across the world, but more so in India over the past few years, is turning more and more into a gig economy. So
Yes.
I would be like a person who belongs to the gig economy where I do various things, and somehow those are the gigs that I get, and I make a living out of it. So in terms of writing, I write a weekly column, which is MS Word on midday. I would write a lot of freelance stuff, which are profiles and interviews, which could be in magazines and various other publications. I'm an entertainment head with the newspaper Midday back here in Bombay. Uh, then from a visual point of view, I do, and of course, there's also podcasts that I do for midday. There are two podcasts
Yes.
actually. One is a video podcast called Sit with Hitlist. The other is an audio podcast that we recently started called the Bombay Film Story. From a visual point of view, I get onto the morning show on ABP News. That's a television network here in India. It's in Hindi, and then I also get on to ABP Uncut for a commentary show. So yeah, I mean that's pretty much at any point in time and day, whether I'm reading or watching, I am actually working, and so it sort of combines itself in various ways across various platforms.
How many hours do you have in your day?
Well, it depends. When does it stop? You know what I mean? And when does it begin? The flip side of a job like this is that at any point in time, when you're watching something, you're talking to someone, you are technically working. And
Yes.
depending on what you saw, what you heard, what you said, sometimes it turns into a column you wrote. It turns into a question you ask someone. So yeah, great. It's a lot of fun, but it has like absolutely zero work-life balance. You don't know where the work starts and where the life ends, or vice versa.
I was just reading a book that said work-life balance is for, used some kind of an expletive there, uh, that if you enjoy what you do, you don't need balance, right? That's not needed. So that kind of reminded me of what you just said, that you're letting curiosity, you're letting your questions define the next set of things that you pick up and kind of get deeper into and create something out of it, right? That's the best part. uh, those conversations lead to things that you just create out of that one word or one sentence or one evening. So that's the most beautiful thing.
Absolutely. Then I think which is true for most non-fiction writers for sure is that the world in its sense is your content. That's really where you're deriving most of your thoughts from, and it's got to be the real world too. And so much of my journalism involves actually being out there, and that aspect of journalism that we have not touched upon is like I would we be out and covering the general elections too, but
Yes.
see it from a cultural point of view. So and of course meet someone uh, who is from a field totally separate from what is my core beat, which is popular culture or cinema, as it were, and then that turns into a pro either a profile or an opinion piece. So in that sense, I think at any point in time, I am learning and not just of course inhaling, but using that somehow to also exhale into what becomes craft or art or an opinion piece, or what have you.
Or a masterpiece, right?
Well, I will leave that for someone else to decide. I mean, I already told you there's a lot of self-delusion in all that we do. You know what I mean? So not indulging that for sure right now.
So give us a sense of the size and scale. We can talk about, you touched upon several different things. Uh, so just give us a sense of the reach of, the readers, the listeners, the lives we are touching on a day-to-day basis.
Well, good question. That's an area that I haven't really thought too much about, because the hope is that if the material that you put out is good enough, it will eventually find its consumer because internet allows that. It's there somewhere. It's lying somewhere. So I don't obsess too much over how many people it reached, as long as I worked hard enough for it to be the final finished product of what I wanted to say, how I wanted to say it. Platform wise, the newspaper that I'm employed with, which is Midday, it is essentially a Bombay based paper, and its focus is on the city itself. It's a very strong city paper with a very long heritage, and 40 plus years is
Mhm.
considered long heritage now in the world of media we live in. It's roughly as old as I am, in that sense, and feels as old as I am too. It feels very young as a newspaper, and while it's only in one city, it ranks among the top 10 newspapers in India. And of course, the moment I get onto platforms like, say, an ABP News, which is in Hindi, I mean, it's practically going to the Hindi heartland, and it's having its own reach, which, as you would know by the scale of India's population, especially the scale of North India's population, which is where the Hindi channels go. I mean, it can go really nutsy in terms of the reach. But I don't think reach is my main goal. I think now, because everything stays, I think longevity of what you put out, or at least the fact of you being satisfied with what you put out, or you being honest about what you said, what you felt, is of course the larger goal.
True, very well said. And I think one thing we don't realize outside of India is just the sheer numbers, right? Even though Midday is a city-based paper, and being a former reader of that publication, I know we are talking millions, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
not a city doesn't mean a few hundred or a few thousand. We are still talking in the millions. So I just wanted to provide that perspective for our audience. Uh, in terms of, you touch upon so many different aspects of life through different forms of media. Is there a particular big challenge that you're facing, or you're, hoping to address?
Well, I think, and I'm presuming anybody who's dealt with media, either as an entrepreneur or as a content creator or a sales or a marketing person, would agree with me that it's become hugely diversified, completely diffused, and at some level, every individual is a media company of his own, right? And that creates its own challenge for guys like me who have been doing this for far too long. Now, let's say, for instance, I am a film critic and have been for close to 2 decades,
Mhm.
but then everybody's a film critic. I could be a commentator, and I've been writing, a weekly column, an op-ed piece for decades. But then technically, everyone is a blogger and therefore a commentator. So I think the big challenge has always been and will continue to be is to make sure that there is more depth in your content and that there's greater perspective on your opinion for it to matter more than practically every single handle there is on Twitter or every single profile there is on Facebook. And that means to constantly get deeper and deeper in terms of your knowledge base on something, because you're constantly also finding new readers and new viewers, because the world is sort of expanding in that sense. So for them to know, they should know from your first go that, hey man, I think he seems to know what he's talking about. So you can't be lax. You can't have a bad day. Your basics should be pretty sound for them to come back to you, and you'll find. So that's really been the challenge in terms of really being on the ball. Absolutely.
And that's very well put. So it's about relevance, like you said, knowing your audience. And as the audience has grown, they've also become very opinionated, I would think, in terms of what works, what doesn't, and you being able to connect with them, not just based on opinions, but having some kind of reasoning, logic, and thought process behind it. And like you said, just kind of having your own thought process and not kind of just jumping around because the opportunity presents itself.
Absolutely. And I think the key is also engagement. The key is also being entertaining. Just because you have something to say, but if you can't hold someone's attention, there's no point in saying it at all. And that's a craft that one constantly works on without getting, too frazzled by it. Without descending to the lowest common denominator because you think that will appeal to a lot of people. I think also, Nitin, what is the challenge is also the opportunity, isn't it? So if you go back to a time when we wrote in newspapers and people consumed it, and maybe once in a while wrote to you, directly on email, or maybe wrote to the letter to the editor. Now there's one constant feedback, and secondly, I could be writing something that then thereafter reaches who is someone otherwise a consumer of New York Times, or who otherwise watches only CNN or BBC. They're there, and I think that audience exists. They can find you. So while there is that one element which is that everyone's a producer, but in that sense, everyone is also the consumer, which was not the case before.
So true. And you actually read my mind. That was going to be my next question. What is that big opportunity? You're right. It's a two-way street for the most part, uh, and it's kind of a yin and yang, right, between the challenge and the opportunity. As you kind of look back at where you stand today, kind of looking behind, is there a lesson learned where you had to kind of pivot and it kind of set the course, or even a success story that you kind of took the bull by the horns and you're really proud of what you were able to achieve? Is there one or example for both of those that you want to share?
Well, I think my answer to your second question would be would actually follow from my answer to your first.
Mhm.
And I'm pretty sure anyone who's hit their 40 has been through what I did at some point about a decade or so ago, is a sense of entitlement that comes with having done a certain amount of work, and that you feel that, this is around the time that I used to be the national cultural editor with Hindustan Times, which is the number two newspaper, or still is, and it was at that time too. And once I was moving on from there, I thought I'd put in an X amount of years. I had been quite sort of, for lack of a better way of putting it, made a name for myself in
Yes.
what I did for a living. And I thought people will things will just happen. I just need to move out. And it's that sense of entitlement, and that happens, you should happen to everyone at some point. And it's not a lesson that you can learn from someone else's experience. It has to happen to you for you to know. I think that just taught me that you should be able to start from scratch at any moment. And that's really how dynamic media as an industry is. And I'm pretty sure all other industries are equally dynamic. And you can't rest on your laurels. You can't give out your great achievements of the past, because they really don't mean anything at any point in time when you're looking ahead. So yeah, I can't genuinely look back and say, you know what, I'm so proud of these XYZ things that I did. Maybe at that moment I was, but there's genuinely no need to look back, because there is other things to do. And that the moment you start looking back is when some element of being complacent really does set in, whether we like it or not.
I absolutely love that answer, and you couldn't have said it better. It reminded me of a one-liner that I was putting together. A ship doesn't sail based on yesterday's winds, right? So that's it's very apt example of that. So thanks for sharing that. I want to switch gears and talk about some one-line life lessons that you can share with us. So get to
You know,
know a
it's
little more of how you think. Yeah.
yeah, just basically be Paulo Coelho for your show right now. Uh, you'll be surprised, or I don't know whether anybody will be surprised. But while I don't follow sport too much, and I was hardly into sport while growing up, it's bizarre the number of things I picked up from sports people and their interviews that seem to really hit hard, because I also believe that sports is like the greatest metaphor for life that you can
Yes.
come across, because at any point in time, a sports person, one, you can't fake greatness in sport. It has to be what it is. And at any point in time, the severe ups and downs that you face, you just do it again and again and again. I think they turn out to be, I believe, psychologists or pop philosophers of their own kind. And one of the things that I came across when I was much younger and figuring out whether I can have a career at all in media, because it didn't pay, and it still is not a high paying profession for people who are just moving into this, who are just starting out. And because I was getting a little restless with about, say, 6 months of non-paid internship with no idea whether I'll stick around or not, I came across this quote by Alan Border, the great cricketer, where he was asked, I think it was Sports Star magazine, he was asked, how much do you make? And Alan Border said, I don't know. I said, what do you mean you don't know? And he said, I take care of the runs take care of everything else. And
Right.
that almost defined me at that age in my early 20s. Because you know what? If I'm going to constantly be good at this, eventually I think, I'll sail through. I shouldn't worry about money. Of course, I'm saying this with a lot of privilege attached.
Sure.
I didn't have a huge rent to pay, and my parents were, well off and all those things. So of course we're going to make use of whatever privilege that we can. But at that age, in your early 20s, if there is no future ahead of you, and all your friends are going to McKinsey and they're getting jobs at Accenture, and you're like, this struggling writer slash journalist with no idea whether you can even be that, it really did help me, at least survive that moment. The other one, again, from a sports person, is this one again. I vaguely remember reading from an interview of hers in some magazine, where this is Martina Navratilova, this
Yeah.
great tennis player.
Hmm.
And I think they were discussing form, and they're discussing form in tennis. And she said this amazing thing, and of course I'm not quoting verbatim, I'm just quoting from memory. She said, it's not about how good you are at your best, but how good you are when you're at your worst.
Yes.
That's what matters. you
Yes.
know and isn't that an amazing thing to live by? And this is so good even as a leadership mantra, because especially when you're leading a team, it's you could put together a great team, and they're going to have their worst and their great days. But that your shittiest day, how well you performed, really defines you, because that's your threshold. You're not going to go below that. And I think to up your shittiest day might be better than trying to to beat your best, because that's going to be a little more consistent. So I stick by it to the best. Like, even if I'm having a bad day at work, in terms of a writer's block, there's nothing
Mm.
coming, and I'm spending longer than usual. I look like this. Okay, so this is the worst shit I've written, but is it worthy of print? And if it is, then I send. Then I press send. You know what I mean? And to keep that going, I think it's something that I've sort of followed. The other one, again, Nitin. This is from a sports person. A filmmaker friend of mine, Sudhir Mishra, says this quite often. He quotes Gary Lineker, and Gary Lineker said, again, this is something that Sudhir said. I've not read it somewhere. Is that you have to be at the right place at the right time
Yeah.
all the time. Sometimes the ball comes to you,
Yes.
and that's a line. Gary Lineker, of course, being a footballer, so
Yes.
there is a metaphor of life from your positioning in
Beautiful.
football, but you just have to be at the right place at the right time all the time. Sometimes the ball comes to you. I thought that's fabulous. So that's
Beautiful. Yes.
so I that's been very inspiring. Of course, in terms of the basic specifics of work, just to get it out there, I go with this line often, attributed to Voltaire,
Mm.
that perfect is the enemy of good.
Yes.
you know and it's a very popular quote, and I know a lot of people use it, but I think it's, especially for someone like me who really procrastinates way too much and continues to and constantly thinks whether this is good enough or not, or can I just have 3 more days so I can prepare a little more. No, man, I think you'll do just as well if you had 3 days more, if you had 3 hours, because perfect is the enemy of good. It's important to be out there and put it out, and then of course move on to doing other things too. And this is something that, I mean, it's a new one. I'm trying to follow this one. When I get a call from someone who wants to meet me right that day for a podcast, and I'm like, okay, can we do it tomorrow? I said, no, I have like an hour, right? Like after 3 hours. I'm like, forget it. I'll just do it.
Just
And
do
it turns out to be a great episode. So yeah, I think Nike got it right. Just do it. You know.
it. No, especially in your profession, I would imagine, that need for, yeah, let me tweak this, let me change this, maybe change this word. It can get a little intimidating.
There is absolutely no end to it. And one of the things that I've enjoyed about writing as a journalist, that's the only writing that I've done, and also it becomes a disadvantage sometimes, is that I can only write to deadline. So I know, and that's my only inspiration. So I know it has to be sent now. You know what I mean? Like, this is it. This is all you can do, and there's no further, because there is space in a newspaper that needs to be filled, and it doesn't go right now. Your masterpiece doesn't count for much. It's useless. So yeah. So in that sense, I mean, journalists tend to follow perfect as the enemy of good anyway. We don't have a choice.
Yes.
There is a deadline.
Am I sensing an undergrad student who worked the night before for the exam tomorrow?
Oh yeah, you're so good at this, Nitin. You should be a psychologist. That's exactly and the only way I've managed to study at all, because you keep procrastinating and you keep pushing it to the next day. All procrastinators are like that. But then the beauty of it is that because there is like a sword dangling over you,
Yes.
you tend to do better because you're as alert as it can possibly be.
Yeah. I'm not a psychologist. The only reason I can relate to that is you're looking at another one here.
Perfect, perfect. It takes one to know one.
Yes. Mayank, this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for making time in your busy schedule for being with us. We would love to continue this conversation and bring you back on with some more stories from your journey. Thank you so much.